Well, I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me this year, but we have a new year showing up here, and that means that there's going to be New Year's resolutions. And there's lots of different types of resolutions. When you really look at them, break them down, for the most part, they're going to fit into categories like weight loss and health goals and mental health and relationship goals and financial and productivity. Those are going to cover most people's goals. And maybe somebody's a beauty contestant and they want to have a goal of, I want to create world peace. And that's great. There's lots of noble goals like this that might not fit directly into these categories, but for the most part, most people's goals are going to fit into one of these categories. So in this video, I'm going to give you one step that has the ability to improve your chance of succeeding at every one of these goals. And it seems kind of weird that one step could help with all these different things, but it really can. This is going to freak you out just a little bit. Here we go.
T.C. Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So when we're looking at any type of resolution or keeping any type of goal really, or succeeding in any type of goal, I like to look at the physiological aspects of it and understand the science behind, why does one person succeed at their goals and another person, has the same goal every New Year's. It's like, oh, I'm gonna have the same goal, and they really stick with it for about 8.5 days. So we wanna understand, what are the roadblocks that most commonly come up? What makes it really difficult for some people to succeed at these resolutions while other people are doing a great job? So we want to understand that there's an emotional side to any type of goal that you have. How important is that goal to you? You may have reasons that make it more important than some other goals you might have. We want to look at the mental side, and a lot of people view that as like, do you just have the willpower to make it happen? And I'm going to help you understand why this is not always accurate like people think. And then we want to look at the motivational side. If somebody has a financial goal of, oh man, I want to make enough money so I can just pay my rent and not be homeless, well, that can be a big motivation. If you're going to be kicked out of your apartment, if you can't make enough money, that can be a strong motivation. So we want to look at these different factors to get some insights of what may go on from person to person, and steps that you can take to make it a lot easier to reach the goals that you have. And when we're looking at any of this, a lot of people just feel like, oh man, I just don't have enough willpower to succeed and sustain that. I just give up too easily. But when we're looking at why wouldn't a person have enough willpower, we need to understand fuel in the body and fuel that the brain needs. So let's look at this study here that we found on the role of motivation, glucose, and self-control. And in this study, they say several studies have shown that individuals have difficulty completing 2 consecutive self-control tasks. The first is completed normally, but there is usually a temporary impairment in performance on the second. The resource depletion theory suggests that this impairment stems from a depletion of resources with self-control drawing on a limited supply. The effects are specific to self-control tasks and not found in relatively automatic and effortless tasks. These observations have been strongly supported over and over in approximately 80 studies using various measures of self-control. So what they're basically saying is that they find that some people, when there's some type of self-control task, that they do fine on the first task, but then that kind of used up all the juice that they had. Like, oh, I have so much juice that I can do things that I really don't feel like doing. But if it's just like doing the dishes or just like doing the laundry, I can do that because I kind of just go into automatic mode. I don't really have to think about it or talk myself into that. I just don't want the dishes piling up. But when it's something for my future or some type of goal, then I really need to have like some gumption to make that happen. And they say that a lot of people kind of use up the resources that they have doing that first task and make it harder to complete that second task. So what we need to understand is, to really do anything, our body needs fuel, and so does our brain. And the easiest fuel that's easiest to use for the body and the brain is glucose. And that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that a person needs to consume carbs or sugars or things that are going to give the body this glucose to create the energy needed to perform any of these tasks. The body has the ability to kind of make its own glucose if someone isn't bringing in a lot of glucose. But in this study, they were saying, okay, how does a person do if we supply them with this fuel source? We give them glucose, and then is it easier for them to perform these tasks? And one important thing that they said was the effect of glucose administration on cognitive tasks, including memory, follows an inverted U-shape dose-response curve. So almost like a shape like this, an inverted U, where the response goes really well here and then it goes down. So what we need to understand is that when we bring in glucose or carbs or sugars, or the body creates this glucose, it doesn't have this indefinite fuel supply that it gives. So a person might do great as this glucose is coming in, but as they burn it up, then maybe they don't do so great. So what we need to understand from person to person is that not everybody processes carbs, sugars, and glucose the same way. Different people process that differently. So some people will process carbs more aggressively, where when this glucose comes in and now the body has this fuel source, the brain has this fuel source, they may process it very aggressively and create a strong crash. So anytime that they spike their blood sugar, they will also create this strong crash and create like this hypoglycemic type response, to where all of a sudden there's not enough fuel in the bloodstream. Now that glucose is not available to allow the body and the brain to function correctly. And I'll put the links to these studies in the description below this video so you can dig deeper into these if you want to. But this study here on the effects of acute hypoglycemia on motivation and cognitive issues in people with type 1 diabetes. So the reason I like this type of study, and when you look at the studies that have seemed to show effects on glucose and available glucose, they often do this with people with diabetes because this is a magnified version of what we're going to see with anybody else. They came to the conclusion in people with type 1 diabetes, hypoglycemia causes a state of heightened self-awareness and distraction during active mental activity. This is likely to leave fewer processing resources available to allow completion of cognitive tasks. Acute hypoglycemia induces a state of significant worry and anxiety that is likely to affect the social, personal, and work activities of people with diabetes. So the reason that they look at this situation where, oh man, they created this hypoglycemic situation because they provided too much insulin. You know, when a type 1 diabetic is giving the body insulin, because since the body's not making it, that's how they control that blood sugar. So when they put more insulin in and they create a hypoglycemic response, they can really look at the effects of how the body and the brain function. But what we need to understand is that a type 1 diabetic giving too much insulin to themselves is not the only person that can create a hypoglycemic situation. Lots of people deal with hypoglycemia every single day. We'll put links in the description below for our video on understanding hypoglycemia and how to fix it if you need to dig deeper into that. But it's important to understand that when one person eats a specific amount of carbohydrates, the result in the body can be much different from someone else. A type 2 diabetic might not be able to process those carbohydrates very well at all, where someone who has a situation going on with their physiology that makes their insulin almost act like a bully, like it processes glucose too aggressively, well, they can create these blood sugar crashes even though they're not providing insulin to the body. It's just the way that their body functions due to imbalances and malfunctions going on in that body. So we need to understand, because I'll put links in the description below, that some studies that show, look, we really don't see a whole perfect correlation with this thing with glucose available and the brain and people's moods and how they function and perform. There's just not a straight correlation. And why would there be when everybody processes carbs and sugars differently? So when you read these studies, they say, well, these 7 studies showed that, wow, this glucose situation, the variability in glucose really affects a person's mood and ability to function and perform, while these other 4 or 5 studies showed that it really didn't. Well, we need to understand who are the people we're looking at in these studies. How are they processing carbohydrates and sugars? How are these other imbalances or malfunctions in their body affecting the way that their body reacts to the foods that they're eating? So instead of looking at just this perfect diet that we're looking for, we need to look at the person and understand how their body chemistry is changing how they're reacting. So when we bring this back to figuring out our New Year's resolutions in different situations and understanding this fuel source thing, it's really about the fuel that's available to the body and the brain and resources that are available. a lot of times a person doesn't have a lot of minerals in this system, and these minerals are used by the body to send signals from the brain to the body and the body back to the brain. And if a person's blood sugar goes very low, if they have enough minerals in the system, those minerals can buffer that low blood sugar and allow the body to function the way that it's trying to function. But if those minerals go really low and blood sugar goes low at the same time, then the person's going to have a hard time functioning, and a lot of symptoms and issues can come up. So when we're looking at, is there a fuel source available for this person to complete these tasks that might be more difficult than they really want to complete, we need to understand, is glucose available to them, and do they have enough other resources to buffer when those glucose variability issues come into play? So when we're looking at keeping blood sugar on an even keel and trying to remove these spikes and crashes in blood sugar, our diet and lifestyle choices become very important. If we're just eating all these carbs and junk and processed food, then we're likely going to create a lot more spikes and crashes until we push things into such a severe state that maybe we become insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic, and then we're really not processing those carbs and sugars very well at all, and that can create a whole different world of trouble for the body. But for the most part, we need to reduce the amount of carbs and sugars that we're eating if we're eating so many that we're creating these big spikes and crashes. But now we're going to come to our main step that can really help improve all these things to improve your chance of succeeding at these goals. And that is to raise these resources. So we don't need to keep this blood sugar on a perfectly stable, even keel all the time if we have enough minerals and other resources in the body to buffer that blood sugar. And the most common cause for a lack of resources is an inability to break those resources down. So if a person's dealing with any digestive symptoms at all, like burping or bloating or constipation or diarrhea or acid reflux or nausea or indigestion, like maybe food just kind of sits there like a rock in your stomach for 6 hours, or any type of pain or discomfort, or even skin or acne issues, all of those are signs that you're not digesting your food correctly, which means you can't pull all the minerals and nutrients out of that food. And that's the most common reason that someone's going to have lower resources. And we're looking at these studies that are talking about, well, they can handle one task. They seem to have enough resources to do that. But if they use those resources up, it can become very difficult for them to have that gumption to do that second task. And this is often because they're not bringing the resources into the body. And this is very common. It's very common for someone not to be making enough stomach acid to help really break their food down correctly. It's very common for someone's bile to become too thick and sticky so it can't come down and help us emulsify our dietary fats and access fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, D, and K. Like, all these things are very important. And when people deal with these digestive symptoms, they often have the viewpoint of, yeah, these are just the cards that I was dealt. This is basically, I'm constipated because my mom was constipated. I just have a constipating personality. They think that those are just how they are. That's just what they were dealt with, and they have to live with that the rest of their life. They don't know that they can fix these things, and they can improve their ability to access the nutrients in the food that they're eating. So this becomes very important, that this one step becomes, if you're dealing with any digestive symptoms at all, you need to correct that, and that's going to bring in more resources so your body has more fuel and more resources available to handle these tasks. When we're looking at weight loss as a goal, the biggest roadblock here is usually cravings that people have. Oh, I'm going to eat really well. I'm just going to have this salad. It's only got a little bit of calories in it. I'm going to burn more calories than I eat. That's always the main goal. The problem is, if your body's not getting the resources it needs, the cravings that come up, you're going to think, man, I'm insane. I was knee deep in a bag of chips before I even knew I bought any chips. The cravings can be significant and almost impossible. And it's really not about willpower. It's about the body saying, hey, I don't have what I need. I don't have enough of these minerals and other resources. So send in that junk that's very easy to turn into glucose so I have a fuel source so that I can at least function. So that's the most common cause, but if someone fixes those digestive malfunctions, allows the body to bring in the resources, then weight loss is often a whole lot easier. Sometimes weight loss can be caused by some of those digestive malfunctions as well. I'm not going to get into all that here, but that's a really big problem. Same with any health goals. A lot of times The health issues are caused by an inability for the body to detox correctly, an inability for the body to bring in nutrients that it needs to function correctly. And so a lot of the symptoms that we view as health problems are just the body changing the way that it's operating to try to deal with this error that's going on, deal with this malfunction. And a lot of times that has to do with digestion that's not working correctly. Mental health, this is often about a lack of resources for the body and the brain to communicate correctly. Now, there's other issues that can create mental health issues. I don't want you to think that it's always a digestive issue. It certainly is not. But in a lot of cases, it's really about the body not having the resources that it needs. Relationship goals, well, to have relationship goals, you really have to work at that relationship. And it makes it a whole lot easier when both people in the relationship are reasonable and rational. And the problem is not everybody is always reasonable and not everybody is always rational. Shocker. But I know, it just happens sometimes. Sometimes people are not so rational. And it's often because the body is shoved so far into this sympathetic fight or flight state because the body's dealing with what it's viewing as an emergency, whether that's some type of infection or overgrowth or just a lack of resources. When the body doesn't have enough resources to function correctly, it's almost like you trying to pay all your bills with 12 bucks. That's a stress. So if the body's really stressed about not having enough resources, it will push into this sympathetic fight or flight state that makes the body function differently and can remove a person's ability to just think rationally or reasonably. So that can be a real problem. If both people are not able to think rationally, that can make it hard to work on a relationship. So if you're having digestive issues or the person you're trying to improve the relationship is having digestive issues, you really want to fix those things and allow the body to function a little bit better so the brain can function a little bit better. Financial goals, productivity goals, all of these things take drive. All these things take effort and motivation. And what these studies have shown us is that sometimes this is not available when there's not enough fuel for the body to do the things that it needs to do. Sometimes this motivation, the mental side, all these willpower things are not available when there's not enough resources for the body to function correctly. So that can make it difficult to do some of these things that are harder. You've had this goal every year for 47 years. Why is it so hard? Well, sometimes the body just doesn't have what it needs to push through the difficult parts. To achieve new goals is always going to have difficult parts. It's about having your ability to push through those difficult parts. And what's really important to understand is to you, this relationship may be the most important thing. That may be your priority. But that doesn't mean that that's your body's priority. You don't know what your body's priority is in a lot of cases. It may have things that it's viewing as an emergency and as a life and death situation that is more important than how you discuss things with Aunt Betty. So you might need to help your body function a little bit better to allow it to let you have your own priorities, to feel like it's not in this emergency all the time where it has to prioritize something else. And once resources are not going towards what the body is viewing as an emergency, then more resources is available for these other things. So it really becomes about keeping this fuel source on an even keel. And a lot of times people try to reduce the amount of carbs and sugars that they're having. Maybe they'll even have the goal of using like a keto or a carnivore diet where they're changing the main fuel source the body is using. But since they can't break down proteins correctly or emulsified dietary fats, when they lower these carbohydrates, they have to lift proteins or dietary fats. And when they try to do that, they just feel lousy. They either feel like they have magnified digestive symptoms or they're just tired and worthless all the time because they removed the only fuel source that the body could process. It's really easy to process and break down junk food and processed food because it's practically broken down in the package. You don't need a lot of gumption to digest that. So when people don't have digestion working correctly, the body will want to gravitate towards these things that are easier to break down. So when they fix the digestive malfunctions, now they don't need so many carbohydrates and it's easier to keep that blood sugar on an even keel. Plus, they have more of these mineral resources and other nutritional resources that when the blood sugar does dip a little bit, they have a buffer system there so that the body and the brain can function a little bit easier. So I know that when you're looking at this and some of these goals, and there's no way that can have anything to do with my constipation. Well, if you're constipated, try this out. Fix your constipation, fix that digestion, and see how much easier some of these things can come. Now, if you're new to this channel and you don't know how to do this, chapters 3 and 4 of my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, kind of walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working right for you and steps you can take to improve those. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below where you can get the whole thing totally for free, and then you can just jump to chapters 3 and 4 to kind of walk you through that. Or if you'd rather watch a video, you can jump over right now and check out our video on full digestive reset. It's a really detailed video about how to go through all those things as well. I can't wait to hear about your results.